Welcome, everyone, to our discussion with Diane Fanning today. We're very excited to be talking with her. My name is Betsy Ashton. For those of you who don't know me, I write mysteries for the most part, suspense, and coming of age stories. And I have been involved with Suffolk for several years now. I've been fortunate to be invited. Today, we're going to be talking with Diane Fanning, who has 26 true crime, contemporary, and historical mysteries in print. And she's working on others. We'll ask for a sneak preview on maybe one of them. But Diane is a very well-known true crime writer. She has, I think 14, or is it 16? 15, oops, my bad. 15 true crime books out. I've read most of them, and they are hair-raising because they are about real people. And then she has her Secret City series, which is 3 books set in Knoxville, Tennessee, during the war, where they were developing an atomic bomb, doing research for that, and her Lucinda Pierce mystery series. So she's got several things going on. I'm sure there are some others that I'm missing, like some standalones, but the big ones are True Crime, Secret City, and Lucinda Pierce. Diane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How you got started writing is really what I'm interested in.
Well, I guess the writing went actually back to 8th grade when I wrote something that we were instructed to write, something that was Edgar Allan Poe-ish. And I did, and my teacher thought it was the best thing in the class and told me after class that I should think about writing for a career. I didn't immediately think about that because I was busy going to get a degree in chemistry. But then eventually that writing bug just kept digging deeper and deeper into my soul. And I started doing some freelance articles. And then I edited and wrote a story for a true for an anthology of Texas women writers. And from there, I really wanted to write a book, and I tried to get an agent for something in fiction, and I wasn't having any luck. So then I saw this story on 48 Hours, and it was about a little girl who was 10 years old, who had been responsible for bringing the end to a 20-year murder spree by a serial killer. When I saw her story, I immediately flashed back to when I was a little girl of 9 years old. I'd been out walking with a friend of mine, and we lived in a neighborhood that was part suburban and part rural. So you'd have houses, then cows, then houses, then a cornfield. And so it was sparsely populated for a suburb. We were going down a hill, and this car pulled up and asked us for directions. We were trying to explain to him on how to get to where he wanted to go. And he said, "Listen, I'm not really understanding. Could you come over here and look at my map?" So I walked over, and he threw open his car door. And instead of a map, he was exposing himself. And he latched onto my upper arm and started pulling. I was pulling back with all my strength, but I was just a little kid. And it was pretty close to losing that battle when another car came up over the hill and laid on his horn. And when he did that, the guy I was talking to let go of my arm and took off with his front door flapping. I was a big fan of Dragnet back then, and I knew just what Sergeant Friday would want me to do, memorize that license plate. So I did. I went home and told my mother, and she contacted the police. And in a short while, less than a week, they stopped the man. And in the trunk of his car, they found evidence that he had been responsible for the sexual assault and murder of an 8-year-old girl, maybe 15 miles from my house. when I found out that, I immediately had questions. Why me? And how could someone even do this? So I started an unofficial study of criminal psychology and criminal minds and that sort of thing that I carried with me through all my life. Then the night I was sitting and watching this story of little Crystal Searles, she instantly became my hero. She did what I did times 1,000. She laid there and watched this serial killer kill her friend. Then he reached over and slit her throat and left her for dead. She assumed on the other wing of the house, everybody was already dead, or they would have never gotten into that bedroom. So she didn't go for help within the house. She set out on her own outside of the house at 4 a.m. in the morning in a land populated with tarantulas, rattlesnakes, cactus, and all sorts of things that could hurt your feet real bad. And she was barefoot. And she walked up past the first house because she was told she should never go to that house, and went to the next house to get help. In that house, Herb Betts was sitting there watching television. He had this years-long habit of getting up whenever the New Year struck in the furthest part in the world. And he would watch TV all day, watching at each hour as every country celebrated the coming of the new year. So he was awake, and she came to the door, and he looked out and he saw she was just a bloody mess. And when he spoke to her, she didn't speak back, but he knew something was wrong. And he took her into the house, and she motioned for a paper and pen, and she wrote, "Everybody is killed." And he wanted her to lay down while he called 911. And she wanted to lay down on the kitchen floor that was a tile floor because she didn't want to get blood in his living room. And his wife called 911 while he was dealing with her and getting her over to a more comfortable place to lie down. And they sent a helicopter in, and she was airlifted to San Antonio. Now, her vocal cords had been cut, so that's why she couldn't talk. And when she arrived at the hospital, she immediately went into surgery. There was a great loss of blood. In fact, the sheath, the thin, paper-thin sheath that surrounds the carotid artery had been nicked. It was a pure miracle that her carotid wasn't cut in half. But they worked on her. She came out, went through recovery. When she became conscious again, pen and paper. Sure, get me the cops. And they brought the cops, and they brought a forensic artist. And even though this little child of 10 years old could not speak, she still could communicate well enough with the artist that a drawing was made, and within an hour, they knew exactly who had committed that crime. So they started making plans to pick him up. And they knew there were 2 children in the home where he was living, and they didn't want to take any risks with their lives. So they planned out how they were going in very carefully. And they expected some sort of fight, but actually there wasn't. He went along with them pretty easily. And they took him in. And on the way into the police station, he said, "Well, I guess you want to know about the rest of them." And that started his confessions. In all, he confessed to 50 murders. More than 20 of them have been definitely confirmed as being murders that he committed. And some of the others, I mean, he didn't even know names and wasn't sure where he was when he committed the crimes. But he said he was 70% done with his confessions. And that little girl got up in the courtroom in front of that monster, still with the scar very visible on her throat. And she pointed her finger at him and said he was the man who killed her friend. I cannot imagine having that much courage. There are adults that wouldn't have that much courage. And I just had to write Crystal's story. I had to write what she had been through.
Mhm.
And so I sat down and I wrote a preliminary chapter. And this was a time before agents encouraged any kind of emailing. But I figured, what the heck? I've been trying for 2 years to get an agent. So I just emailed it to an agent. Within 24 hours, I had an agent, and she worked with me to create a proposal and present it to publishers. And when we finished with that, 2 different publishers offered me 2 book contracts. So I actually had a pick of 2, which was really stunning to me. You go wandering in the desert for so long and you don't expect to find a feast at the end.
That's fantastic, Diane. I have to ask you though. So you're dealing with gore, blood, guts in your true crime books. Was your maiden name did it have anything to do with your choice of being a true crime writer? And I know the answer.
Yes, I don't think it did, but I will tell you, my father's family had pushed very much in the very beginning for me to use my maiden name, which was Diane Butcher.
I'm glad you didn't.
It was just, to me, it was too obvious.
I was going to say, it might have been just too precious.
Yes. And everybody would have thought I made it up.
Well, didn't you?
No, that was my father's problem.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I know I read Through the Window, and I just found it to be one of the most chilling books because you got into the mind of this serial killer. You got into his psyche. And I have read a lot of true crime. I admit to being a true crime junkie. It is not a guilty pleasure. I just love true crime books. I love nonfiction and fiction both. But you got into Sells' head so well.
It was a really, really bizarre experience because honestly, I was raised in a very sheltered, middle class, born in the 50s life. It was like, I didn't know how bad evil really was. I mean, I'd never really met anybody that I knew was evil.
Mhm.
So when I embarked on this project, I wrote to him and he agreed to see me. By the time it was all said and done, I had interviewed him more than 20 times and exchanged a lot of correspondence with him. And it was a soul-shattering experience sometimes. Sometimes I'd go in to see him and all he'd want to do was tell me jokes. And I had a hard time keeping him on course. But then I'd laugh with him and then I'd feel guilty because I laughed with this monster. But it was like I couldn't show negative emotions. If I showed any negative emotions to me, he would cut me off in a heartbeat. So I just did what I could to keep the relationship going. And one time, he absolutely terrified me. I'm sitting in this little booth, and there's a plexiglass wall, and he's on the other side. We both have telephones to our ears, and each of us have a little tiny counter right under the window. I told him something that a sheriff had told me to ask him about it, and he got so angry. He stood up, he grabbed that shelf and shook it, and his whole face changed. The shape of his face seemed to change. His eyes, which were hazel, of course, easily changed with different moods. That's typical of hazel eyes. But there was something in those eyes that was so malevolent. And I thought that I am seeing right now the last face that his victim saw.
Mhm.
And sometimes he'd talk to me about crimes and he'd soft pedal them, leaving out some of the worst. And other times he would go over the top trying to disturb me and upset me and talking in the most vulgar terms he could to describe what he did. And this was a bad, bad man. Not only just lots of people, but in one instance, he killed a father. He killed a 4-year-old boy. He killed the pregnant mother who, when she went into labor, he waited till she was finished so he could kill the baby in front of her. And then he killed her and left a baseball bat inside of her. It was such a horrendous, horrendous crime. And when I talked to Anne Rule about reading my book, she said, well, yeah, but you got to tell me what chapter that crime is in, because I don't want to read that one. And it was a horrible, horrible thing. And I'm sitting there in my Once Upon a Time innocence, listening to it, and it really did take a toll. The benefit was that I was writing about it. Mm-hmm. And so I would go back and throw all the demons into my writing. And I literally did not have a nightmare about him for 15 years, till 15 years after I wrote the book, because I had exorcised all of those demons through my writing. And on the other hand, my husband, my daughter, my son, all had nightmares about Tommy Lynn Sells. So that was interesting.
I would call that transference.
Yes.
I am not going to be spooked by these guys, but the family has to be spooked by these guys.
Right.
Well, I find it interesting that you mentioned Anne Rule, because all of us who love true crime knows she was the one who wrote The Stranger Beside Me about Ted Bundy and about working with Ted Bundy. A brilliant writer, a horrifying story, not as horrifying, I think, as Tommy Lynn Sells, but equally they're up there 1 and 2 in my estimation of really terrifying.
Tommy Sells said that Ted Bundy was a pervert.
Oh,
because he could only kill one type of people.
Oh.
And Sells, on the other hand, he would kill women and children and men and whatever struck his fancy.
So he was an equal opportunity bad guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was looking for opportunity. Who the victim was did not matter. That changed a bit when he encountered Fabian Witherspoon. She was a little bit taller than him. Mm-hmm. She had brought him into her home because he gave her a story about having children and a wife without any food. She was loading up food in a garbage bag for him to take, boxed goods and stuff. And that's when he attacked her. And he raped her repeatedly. And when she was bent over the toilet, she grabbed the ceramic duck on the back of the toilet and bashed him in the head and was able to get his knife away from him. And she cut him up badly. He had a lot of injuries to internal organs. He ended up spending 10 days in the hospital afterwards. And although Fabian had been badly hurt, she survived.
And yet he's in the hospital with all of these knife wounds. Do the police have any idea that this is the guy they really want?
Yes, because this time she could give a description. The victim survived. So she could give a description. She could tell where she encountered him. And they looked and they found him. And then, unfortunately, he was given a plea bargain. And all he had to do was spend 5 years in prison. And when he got out after that, he never killed anyone but petite women and children. He was afraid of a grown woman.
Right. Someone he could overpower.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, you've written about a lot of other truly evil people. I know you wrote the Casey Anthony book. I think that got you on the New York Times bestseller list. Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
But you've written about, mothers who kill their children, more than one time. And I do write about people who kill people. I even had a serial killer who just literally killed people who killed bad people, or killed people who killed the innocent. But I could never kill a child in a book. I could have an evil character do it, but I couldn't dwell on it. It just, I don't know
Yeah,
how
it
you
was.
did it.
Well, I tell you, it got to a point where I didn't want to do that anymore with children as
Mhm.
victims. Because it's really so troubling. And the other thing is I have a strong belief that the most important person is the victim.
Mhm.
And when somebody dies when they're just a child,
Yeah.
there's only so much praise you can give to a child because their life has been so short and it was
Mhm.
cut off so horribly. So you can cherish the memory of that child, but you can't talk about their life and who their friends were so much. Depends on their age. You can get into some of that, but it it's not only difficult from an emotional point of
Mhm.
view, particularly if you're a mother, that it it's even more difficult from the point of view of not being able to fully realize that character who is the victim.
That's true. We could talk about true crime forever. You and I have done it over lunches forever. Let's talk about Lucinda
Lucinda,
and where you are with that book, because this is an interesting series and it's an interesting story. I think a lot of our friends out here on the Zoom call will enjoy hearing.
there are 7 books in the series.
Mhm.
They came out originally in hardcover. Some of them, but not all of them, came out in a paperback.
Mhm.
And a bunch of them are on audio. I'm not sure. I think all of them now, but I couldn't swear to that. And the the first 4 books in the series, I've gotten the rights back to them, and I'm planning to do a re-release as a paperback. Lucinda to me was a fascinating character.
Yeah.
I was inspired to write someone like her by this group of people who had facial disfigurements, and I read a blog post they had written about how it's always the bad guys with facial disfigurement and never the good guys.
Mhm.
So I wanted to make a good guy that had that flaw, that was looked at funny by other people. And so I created Lucinda, who um, was a tall, lanky, beautiful woman.
Mhm.
But in a domestic uh, service call, she got in between a man and a wife and got shot in the face.
Ooh, right.
She lost one eye and she had disfiguring all along her face. And she wore a patch on that one eye. And the first book, you learn about what happened to her, and you learn about this first case that she took on about a serial killer. And she, she had a strange reaction for people because, like, if it was one of those woofy type of men, they'd see her from one side and they'd go, wow. And then they'd see the other side of her face. And suddenly it just wasn't good anymore. It would be turned off. And she was also not a woman that would let other male police officers push her around. So that was something that some male police officers had trouble with.
Mhm.
So she encountered all of that. She also had problems with regulations that don't allow, except for exceptions, a police officer to be out in the field with monovision. So she had to learn how to shoot all over again. She had to learn how to walk and keep her balance all over again.
Mhm.
So we go through that with her while we're going through the crime scenario, and this new 8-year-old character is someone that is she meets there because she's the victim's child,
Mhm.
and that character stays with her through the series.
Yeah, I did. I've read, I think, two of the books, and I just, like you, I found her intriguing. I love a character that's quirky. Um, and years ago, I read about a private eye, 6 foot tall woman who got into really ugly, ugly, ugly things and went home stripped naked and played the drums. Now, you're going to remember that character
Well, yeah.
because she's doing something unusual. She's not doing it on stage, she's doing it in her house, of course, but just the idea that that was the release. And and you've got Lucinda,
I'd be afraid I'd hurt something.
Yeah, well, I'm not coordinated, so I would fall off the stool and hurt something. But with Lucinda, you've got two halves. You've got the beautiful half, you've got the destroyed half, and I like the fact that she is able to bring those together and still have a career. I think that was really a very smart way of writing about this woman, and I liked her a lot.
Yeah, she was a very strong woman.
Yeah,
and she didn't take much crap from anybody. Except from that 8-year-old. She did take it from her.
Well, that's, you got to do that sometimes. It's like, I mean, I know I write about strong women, and in my current manuscript, I have a strong woman, but she's not what you expect. So we'll get to her sometime. Maybe. I do like Lucinda Pierce. I am very excited that you're going to bring them back out in paper. Are they in ebook, or are you going to also bring them out in ebook?
Oh, they're already in ebook.
Oh, okay. So you got you got
so
the paperback rights.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so
I already had the ebook rights.
Okay.
To the first 4 books anyway, and now I have the reprint rights.
I think that's great. I think the reprint rights and a relaunch of the ebook should bring a lot of new life to that series.
I hope so. I think she's a great character.
She's a great character, and I don't find the series dated. So, which is unfortunate. And some of the really, really great series out there, they don't hold up after 10 years.
Well, it's like you're watching an older show on TV and you're yelling at them, well, use your cell phone.
It's the 60s. We didn't have cell phones. Yeah, we do that all the time, or the reverse. It's the 60s. Why do you have a cell phone?
Right.
You don't whip it out and go, I'm going to make a call. I love anomalies. I used to work in film, and I was script continuity. So I got to make sure that hands came in always from the correct side, not this way. They brought something in, they took it away.
Well, ever since you talked to me about doing that, I have been noticing things on television shows that I never would have noticed before.
Yes.
Okay, there's a guy sitting there, and then when you move over to this side of the bar, and then you go back to this one, that guy's not there.
Right.
He didn't move.
Right. He didn't.
Next time he's there.
Well, we were watching a rerun of Blue Bloods last night, and they have the wonderful Sunday dinner scene, and they had a new character there. They did Grace, and he crossed himself backwards. And I looked at Terry, and he looked at me, and he goes, "That was backwards, wasn't it?" I said, "Oh yeah." So okay.
Well, they should have made him Orthodox.
It wouldn't have worked. Anyway, let's talk about Libby and your historical mystery set in the Secret City. I fell in love with this character. Absolutely.
Libby Clark was a young woman who really wanted to make a mark. Mm-hmm. When her cousin died at Pearl Harbor, she wanted to be part of the war effort. Mm-hmm. Now, she had a double major in chemistry and physics. Mm-hmm. So she had the education, and she was equipped to work in a Manhattan Project site. But since she was a woman, the first people that were interviewing her wanted her to work on projects that involved her creating something in the kitchen, which was not what she wanted to do. She wanted to do something real, something important. She wanted to be part of that.
I don't know. There's some things I've created in the kitchens that were total bombs.
But when you're talking about war effort.
Okay.
Yeah. So she finally got her opportunity. Mm-hmm. And it was a very strange opportunity because she was hired without knowing what she was going to do, just on the promise that it was very, very important war work. And she went to training up in upstate New York. And when she finished the training, she didn't know where she was going to go. And they just put her on a train with a ticket to Chicago and told her there'll be someone waiting for her there. And she gets there and they give her another ticket and saying, you're heading south. And she ended up just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, in a town that at that point had no name. It had dirt streets and wooden sidewalks. And it was a construction zone. They were building a city in the middle of the forest where there was nothing at all. And it was a very strange environment. She was the only woman scientist in her group. Technically, there was not a woman scientist in her group, but I made her up, so I put her there. Yeah. And she went to work very early on when they opened up that first facility, stocking it with equipment and stuff. And in the first book, she solves a murder that happened on the grounds. And it was difficult because everybody was out to protect the top scientists, and the killer was one of the top scientists. So she had to overturn some carts to get justice for the woman who was killed.
And of course, the killer was a man because there were only a couple of female scientists there.
The women that were there were the wives of scientists,
right?
Or they were the young women who were working on the line, watching dials and adjusting dials, which without knowing what they were doing. They had no idea of what was going on, just that this is where these dials have to be. Here's your range of safety. And, that's all they did. Wow. No clue that they were involved in the Manhattan Project.
When Libby finally finds out, if I remember correctly, she's horrified.
Well, yeah,
and proud. And proud.
Yes, both. And they didn't tell anybody who was going there except for the very top people.
Right.
What was going on? That they were trying to make a uranium bomb. But when you put together a bunch of chemists and physicists, even fresh out of college, you've got a group who can think. You've got a group who's been reading scientific journals for a decade, and they figure it out. But they can't say it in public. They can't say it in front of their bosses. They have to keep it all subterranean. And in that kind of situation, you develop a lot of relationships, because there were people that were just there to spy on the employees and report back if they spoke of anything they shouldn't speak of.
Right.
So it was a rigorous environment, and the things people put up with there, like, for example, if they had to evacuate the place because they would naturally be a target, if you had children in school and children at home, you took the children who were still at home and you went out to your assigned meeting place outside of the city, and then waited there. And your children who are in school are going to be picked up by other people and taken to these different locations. You did not know where your children were. You could only trust that they were transported by others. And it was something they tolerated because they knew it was important for the war effort.
Right.
And they were willing to make that sacrifice and to give up a lot of their freedoms in order to bring an end to the war.
Right. You did a lot of research on that book.
Oh, that was so much fun. But I'll tell you how I first got started. It was through a true crime book.
Oh, which
I
one?
wrote a book about this woman who killed 2 husbands. And she had spent her teenage years post-war, but at this facility. And post-war, there was still a lot of security there.
Oh, yeah.
And so she had grown up there, and her father had founded the museum there. And so that's how I became aware of the place, you know, and how strange and cool it was. And that's what got me rolling. And I was starting to do too much research when I was supposed to be working on this true crime book. And so I set it aside and said, I'll do that later. So I came back and finished up the true crime book and then came back to do the research. And I do love research. So it was a good thing.
Research is fun. I don't believe in the, I think, misplaced maxim of only write about what you know. God, that would be boring. So
yeah, well, you only write about what you know, but if you don't know it, you research it and then you write about it.
And then you know.
Yes,
so
then you know. Yeah.
It does come full circle. Years ago, my husband and I went to the museum at Oak Ridge. I did not make friends there.
Oh dear, what did you do?
I pointed out that one of the exhibits that had a lot of Japanese artifacts in it were upside down. They were. I could read Japanese. They were, one did, and then I guess the museum manager came out and said, how do you know? I said, I can read them. It's upside down. All you have to do is go. Phew! I've not been back to see if they went or not. But I think I made.
Well, what fascinated me the most when I went there were the little houses.
Yes.
That they built.
Oh my God.
They little modular houses.
Yep.
They just brought them in pieces and put them together. They were amazing.
And with often no heat.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, well, they put in coal stoves. So that's how a lot of them were heated, with coal stoves.
I know. I mean, you think about it now, what that war effort must have been like, because there were so many privations that people experienced, but they all come out in your book. These are 3 books that take me right into what was going on. And I could feel the mud pulling at my shoes as they walked across these sodden streets. Mm-hmm. And, I could just feel the atmosphere there. And also I could feel, as you wrote, the pride people had in their work, even though they didn't know what it was. They kind of knew, they didn't know for sure, but they had a lot of pride in getting it right.
They were often told how important their work was for the war.
Right.
And they believed it. They weren't skeptical about it. And, they did everything they could to keep morale up there, mm-hmm. which was good, but in a way it was a problem. Mm-hmm. That's why they didn't want anybody to know about the murder that happened on the grounds.
Yeah, well, I can see why they would probably not want to publicize a murder in a city that doesn't exist with no post office box. Yeah, I can see that. I'm down with that. So this year is 2022. And are you planning to re-release the Lucinda Pierce series this year? Do you think
sometimes this year? I want to finish. I want to finish my current project.
We're going to get to that.
Okay. But yeah, I'm hoping to do it sometime this year. I already have covers for the ebooks and the audio books, and I just have to get them reformatted to make them book cover size.
Great. And you have rights for those?
Yes.
For the covers. Okay. Great.
Yes.
That's always one thing we have to ask ourselves. Did that contract actually say that? Yes, it did. Great. Yes.
Well, I had these done by an artist because my original covers I cannot use. They belong to the publisher.
Okay, good. Gotcha. So you alluded to what you're working on now. And I am intrigued because we all know the story, but we don't. So why don't you tell us what you're working on and how you got so interested in someone named Lizzie?
Well, I was working on a television show called Deadly Women. And I worked through a number of different seasons on her and on deadly women throughout history and contemporary deadly women. And then they decided to do a special on Lizzie Borden. And I started becoming very intrigued with her. I'd already read a lot of books about her and I knew a lot about her, but I realized that there was nowhere where the story was told from her point of view. And I wanted to do that. So I'm working on a manuscript about her in first person. And we will see how that goes. I mean, I've got to not only please myself, but please my agent and then please the publisher. So we'll see how it goes. I'm having an incredible amount of fun. Part of my research on this is, I want to have as much factual basis as I can. There are pieces in her life that are kind of vacant, but I want to build the skeleton of what really happened and then add on to that skeleton. And in doing so, I've been doing a lot of newspaper research. And I tell you, you find out some really strange and weird things when you're looking at newspapers from the late 1800s. The things that people believed then, the things that were important to them, the things that they did, what was going on to disrupt society. You not only had, the whole industrial revolution was in full swing, but you had women starting to stand up for their rights, and the women voting thing was pushing forward very strongly. In fact, there was even a woman in that period that was arrested because she showed up and tried to vote. So there was a lot going on then. and it's fun
Thank
to
God.
read about it.
Yeah, I think I can't wait to read more of this. Spoiler alert, I've read the first several chapters. I want more. Can I have some more, please? I think it's good. I think it's an interesting way of looking at a popular song that is wrong.
Yes.
And Sharon McCrum did this years ago when she rewrote the Ballad of Tom Dooley and got rid of the Kingston Trio ideas of what really happened with Tom Dooley. Good book. Boy, did it shatter that myth. And I have the feeling, other than the fact that we know that Lizzie Borden did kill her parents, or maybe she did, you're going to tell us a lot more about her.
Yeah, I hope to. I have a character in my head that I think is her. And some people I know will disagree with it, and some people will find it agreeable, but it is fiction. And that's the fun with historical fiction for me, is I love doing research. It just makes me happy as a little clam. And to be able to do research and writing, which is also my other pleasure, this puts them both together.
Right.
And so historical fiction to me is a roller coaster of fun.
It is. I agree with you. And I'm glad you're writing about Lizzie Borden, because I don't really know much about her. So I'm looking forward to learning something new, and also enjoying the heck out of a new story from you. It's about time. We need another new story from you. She's going, yeah, I know. You mentioned earlier Deadly Women. And I want to get back to that, because right now we have just a plethora of true crime stories on cable television, on network television, on podcasts. They're everywhere. Some have really good quality. Others could use an editor, let's just say.
Yes. Well, and the thing of this,
that.
when I do interviews for these shows, I mean, I don't have any content control. I have content over what comes out of my mouth, but I have no control over whether they use which parts of what I say that they use, or which parts of anything else that they use. And that's true for most of the people you see being interviewed on true crime shows. I mean, some of them are hosts, and the hosts do have some control, but it's been a lot of fun. I mean, I've done well over 100 shows, and uh, it, everything from Southern Fried Homicide to Deadly Women, and um, they the crews are so much fun. And plus, I've had crews from all over the place. Like I've had crews from Australia, crews from Japan, crews from Britain, um, and it's just a blast. And I've done also radio shows for the BBC, and lots and lots of podcasts. I have a page with a list of my podcasts on it on my website, and it's so much fun because you get to meet people from not only all over this country but all over the world, and answer their questions, and on break learn about them. So it's been a real blast.
I think your last two was a two-part series, one of which has been aired, the other one hasn't, but it goes back to Tommy Lynn Sells again.
Yes.
There's just so much interest in this guy. Tell us a
Well,
little bit about that.
he got executed, so that raised
Yeah.
the interest level. I'm sure he'd be glad to know that if he could hear from the depths of hell. But he one of the other important things that happened with Sells in my life, more than it just being my first true crime book, was that Sells, I was having trouble with Sells because he stopped talking to the Texas Rangers. And that put me in a position where he was only talking to me, and who wouldn't talk to anyone else about his crimes. So I had law enforcement, private investigators, family members of victims calling me, wanting to know things, where he was at a certain time, what was going on. And so I had to carry that burden. And I ended up having to maintain contact with him for longer than I really wanted to, because I had all these people depending on me. So one day I decided, I'm going to try to get him to understand the Texas Rangers' point of view. They said something that ticked him off, and I explained to him, I said, sometimes I have to ask you questions that make them angry, that make you angry, because they're hearing it from district attorneys and sheriffs and stuff around the country, and you shouldn't let it reflect on them. And so, as an example, I used this case I had just seen on 2020 about a woman who had been convicted of killing her 10-year-old son and sentenced to 65 years. And when I first started watching the show, I was very, very skeptical, because there was the woman saying she's innocent, her parents saying she's innocent, her lawyer saying you're innocent, her friends saying it, and I'm going, yeah, we've all heard this before. But then the prosecuting attorney got on, and he kept saying things over and over and over again that I knew were not true. Like, no one takes a weapon from your house and uses it against you. Well, good heavens, Sells did that over and over again. There were no stranger fingerprints found in the house. Well, you know what? Sells often went into a house and never left fingerprints. He knew enough not to do that. So I was telling him about these things. I didn't tell him anybody's name. I didn't tell him the time frame. I didn't tell him the location. I told him zippity doo dah about all of that. And he wrote back to me, was that maybe on the 13th of the month, right before I did the murder in Springfield? And I was stunned. I looked up the dates to confirm it, and what he said was absolutely right. So we had some additional correspondence, and I asked him who told him about the case, and he was on death row, so he had no way of watching TV. And he got kind of mad at me for even asking that question. And he said, listen, Missy, I know a lot more about murder than you do. There are people in prison right now for crimes I committed, and I don't care. So I got a little more detail out of him, and then I decided to go back up to death row and talk to him again. By this time, the publisher was waiting for my book, and my deadline smacked me in the face. And I just had to fill in this piece of the puzzle and find out if there was any there. So I went up and I talked to him, and I became very convinced that there was a very good possibility that he committed this crime. And if it wasn't him, it was someone just like him. And so I decided to include it in the book, not as a definitive act that he committed, but as one of his confessions, and hope that if there's truth in it, someone else can come along and take that truth and ride it to justice. So that's what I did.
Mhm.
And it turned out that after the book came out, the first person I heard from was Julie's mother. And she wanted to have my permission to connect me with Julie's appeals attorney. So I got in contact with him, and he got a copy of my book. He gave a copy to the judge on the appeals case, who read it. And first thing he ruled on right away was, you've got to test the hair that was found in Joel's hand for DNA. They had never done that. So he said that had to be done. And the other thing he said is, but don't enter this stuff as new evidence now, because you'll need it as new evidence for a new trial, because I'm going to overturn the verdict. And he did. And meanwhile, we were trying to get Julie out of jail, where she was being physically abused by other inmates. Julie was not a typical inmate. She was a graduate student when she was arrested, going for a PhD. And her parents were retired missionaries, so they didn't have any money either. So she ended up with a court-appointed attorney who, by his own admission, was in above his head and had no idea how to handle the case, and let a number of things slip that he should have pounced on. And so there she was, sitting in jail, getting her head smashed up against concrete walls day after day. And we wanted to get her out. So I testified before the Prison Review Board up in Chicago, but actually that didn't do anything. Then when the ruling came down, she finally got a new trial. She finally got her verdict overturned and possibility of a new trial. Her family and friends were out in the parking lot waiting for her to come out. And as she was coming out, she was arrested again and charged and returned to the jail. So it's a horrible thing. But in the end, she got a new trial. And, I provided an affidavit, which was accepted as evidence. And she was acquitted. Not only was she acquitted, she had a choice. She could take a cash settlement, or she could try to get a certificate of actual innocence. She wanted the certificate of actual innocence because she wanted justice for her boy.
Good.
So that's what she went for. But up to this date, there has been no justice for Joel Kirkpatrick.
Wow. Amazing. We're about almost out of time. So I have one last question that you don't know about. And that is, what's the last book you read?
Oh, the last book I read was The Burning Room by Michael Connolly.
Oh, I love that book.
Yes.
It's so much fun.
Yeah. I'm sort of on a fiction binge now. I read a lot of nonfiction last year. So
I'm going back and
through
forth.
Fiction. Yeah.
Yeah, you gave me Paradise, Lizzie Johnson's
Yes.
book, which I loved, and my book club is now reading that book because I insisted. So that's
a
good
good book.
nonfiction. I have one more comment. I'm going to put a plug in. Diane is part of a literary family, and her stepson, Pete Fanning, S.A. Fanning, writes middle grade and young adult. And I have read every book he's published. I love his work. They are wonderful things. We got to get him to write a mystery so we can bring him to Suffolk. But that
Yes,
would be so much
yes.
fun to have him at Suffolk in a couple of years. Really great writers. Diane, I'm so glad we had this chance to talk. I think we could have been more outrageous, but I was trying to keep it more professional than I normally do. So thank you so much for sharing your time. Thank you so much for sharing all of the stories, especially those about Tommy Lynn Sells. Even I can't create a guy as bad as him, and I did write a book about a
Well, you know,
serial
you
killer.
got to give Katie credit. It's a dangerous thing to put two friends together in an interview.
Well, we didn't talk about any of our stuff. We talked our friendship. We talked about our books. So that
Yes.
was better. And we do have to thank Katie and the rest of the team at Suffolk Mystery Authors Festival. We hope that next year we will both be back, you with a new book, me with a new book, in person, so that we can meet our fans. And
that would be fabulous.
Oh, that would be so much fun. Diane, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
Truly appreciate it. And Katie, back to you.